Halo Reach was a pretty big deal when it released because for the first time ever, we were a part of a team of Spartans, which made us wonder, what if at the beginning of Halo Reach, Noble 6 actually fell out of the Falcon a little bit early and broke both of his legs, so then Noble Team had to recruit a new member of the team, Noble 7, whose sole purpose was to carry Noble 6 through the rest of the mission. Would Halo Reach be completed if it was this two-player co-op game where one player was responsible for carrying the other all the way through the entire course of the game? Well, Luke and I decided we were gonna go and find out. But before we jump into this video, the more important question definitely is, what if Noble 7 was just trying to get more brand recognition out there? What if more people needed to know that he actually existed in the Halo universe? Well, one great way to spread awareness for his brand would be to have a really good looking website, and he'd probably use Squarespace, who sponsored this video. Squarespace is your all-in-one platform for everything you need for making a great and professional looking website. More about that at the end of the video. So jumping into this challenge, we did already do this in Halo 3 and it was extremely tedious, so here we are at Reach once again, but we had to set a few rules going into this so we could make sure we were thoroughly testing whether or not we could figure out if this challenge could be completed piggyback or not. So going off of the core rules we had set up in the Halo 3 video, the main rule is we're going to take turns each level being the person that cannot walk, because of course their legs are broken and their armor is locked, which means the player has to stay standing. They're not allowed to sit down in the passenger seat of a Warthog. The player whose legs are not broken, however, in this case Noble 7, will have to carry Noble 6 all the way through each level, and because he's going to be busy carrying Noble 6, he can't use his arms in this case, so only the player that cannot walk is able to shoot. And then the only stipulation is just so that the non-walker player can get on top of the head of the carrying player. We always make the stipulation that the non-walking player's armor works just enough where he can jump but can't walk, just so we can get that all sorted out. And oh boy, was Halo Reach a doozy just going into it right away. First up, we were on Winter Contingency, which actually was way more difficult than we thought this would be. In Halo 3, there were some tedious parts along the way, but there was nothing as difficult as what we noticed we'd be facing right away in Halo Reach. So for this first level, I was Noble 7 and Luke was Noble 6, which means I would be in charge of carrying Luke all the way to the end of Winter Contingency, and there was a few problems we faced right away. This first section of the game is just this longest straightforward walking section you could possibly imagine. No vehicles, nothing. Just go ahead and walk forever. It did give us some time to try to figure out the best strategies for moving forward, but one of the biggest problems we faced here was the fact that, for whatever reason, Noble 6 is just extra slippery, and whenever he would stand on my head, it seemed like the character would immediately slide off after just a couple of steps, which meant after just making maybe 3 or 4 steps, we had to constantly stop and reset before moving further. This made this whole opening section extremely painstakingly slow, similar to what we had to deal with when we were doing the no walking run. I tried various different strategies here. I could try flinging Luke to get a couple of extra feet when he was jumping off, and that helped a little bit. And I did notice at times walking backwards, I could maybe keep Luke on my head for a couple more seconds, but it was really tedious with the long stretches we had to go in the level, and of course I couldn't see where I was going, so there was oftentimes I would bump into something, which of course would cause Luke to slide off even faster. When we eventually pushed up to the truck section, it was a little bit better because I was able to put Luke on the back of the truck next to George and kind of just drive him like I was his Uber to the next place. After we got to where we were going, I dropped Luke off and decided the best strategy, since I can't shoot here, is to just drive around and try to run over enemies while Luke stood in a still area shooting at the enemies. It was a little chaotic at times, but for the most part we got through it. After the Falcon part, we did run into a little bit of a challenge here, as there's a ton of enemies in this area, which kind of gave us a sneak peek of what we're going to be dealing with when we get into later levels of the game. With all of the various enemies that are in this section, one thing we have to be really careful about is finding the fastest way possible to maneuver the player who can't walk into safety and to move forward in the level so we don't constantly die or get stuck. With all the chaos around, there probably wasn't an easy way for me to try to get Luke on top of my head here, so it was easier just to actually push him manually into the room, and I guess Emil tried to kind of help. It was a little weird, but this was so tedious so far, and we still had another section to go, which was going to be this narrow linear section with these pretty powerful elites at the end. Fortunately enough, our savior, the forklift, was here, so we were actually set to maybe have a strategy. There was some awesome highlights that of course happened with the forklift. We did have a little problem at the end, but we did end up figuring it out and getting it through this level. Honestly, we were absolutely dreading everything else, because if winter contingency was this difficult, we're only going to be up for a more awful challenge as this gets harder. Sword base is next, and this means Luke and I are switching roles, so now I get to be Noble 6 and get to be carried by Luke. But right away at the beginning, there was a forklift at the start, so we were pretty hyped about that. It was actually pretty easy to get through the early section of the level. When Luke was in the forklift, he actually managed to launch a skirmisher, which we thought was pretty funny as well. We moved up forward in the level, and I grabbed the target designator and shot at the enemies behind us, which would allow the allies to move up without me having to kind of be shooting in the middle of some danger zone and risk dying. We cleared out all of the enemies here, but for some reason the allies just stood still and didn't move up. We were actually really confused. We thought we maybe had some glitch happen. For whatever reason, just the allies were just chilling there, not wanting to move up for whatever reason. Luke couldn't figure out why, I couldn't figure out what was going on, and the game was kind of just stuck there. So we're thinking we're gonna have to reset to the beginning of the level, which would have been extremely tedious, before we realized that one interesting and unique thing happened when we were playing on this level so far. That random skirmisher that just kind of flew off and noped out of the fight was actually still alive somewhere out there, and we would have to kill him before the rest of our allies would move up. So I ended up doing what any normal person would do and shot the target designator right on top of the cliffside, and actually managed to snipe the skirmisher out of wherever he was hiding. I don't know exactly where he was, but he was gone after that. And actually that solved our problem. We were a little surprised, but our allies moved up and were able to move on with the level. Now, of course, I didn't have a target designator this time when we got to the section with the wraiths, so I'd have to take out the wraiths without the designator, which kind of was annoying. I jumped on Luke's head and we rushed the wraith, which was one strategy that did not work. We died. We tried a few more times and I was able to use a rocket launcher and finally take them out, which was good. From there, the rest of this level was actually a breeze. We just used the warthog, drove around, Luke hit some switches, and it was pretty easy actually. Fortunately enough, we didn't have to do too much of this weird head bobbling thing for piggybacking on this section so far, but we knew we had the indoor section, which would probably be pretty difficult since there's a bunch of ramps and long hallways we have to go up. When we're getting back to the base, Luke went ahead and got another forklift to carry me inside the building, and when we're in the section where we had to fight off the hunters, the main strategy we used here was Luke would walk behind the hunters and aggro them to face him, and then I would stand on the other side of the room and shoot their backs, so I didn't have to worry about trying to jump and dodge the hunters, and it actually worked out pretty well here. And then we got to the inside section, which was something we were pretty worried about. We knew it would be really tedious going into this, and all of a sudden I stood on Luke's head with actually no problem at all. Okay, this was something we were really confused about, because we had so much trouble on winter contingency, and all of a sudden when Luke gets to be Noble 7, he doesn't have any problem keeping me on his head, and I wasn't sliding around or slipping off. We had no idea why this was the case, but we were happy that we didn't have to spend more time than necessary on this level. It was really weird, but we definitely needed to figure out why Luke's Spartan was so greasy and my Spartan was like extra sticky, not having to worry about falling off, because we need to figure out a way to replicate this if we're going to do this challenge correctly, and it could be pretty game changing here. We finished the rest of this level pretty much without any problem. When we got to Nightfall, we realized we needed to figure out what was going on. So once again, the roles were reversed. I would have to carry Luke, and this is where we found the biggest discovery that is so random that completely changed the outcome of how this run probably would be and how long it would take us to complete it. After doing several tests in the opening section of Nightfall, we discovered that whoever is the host of the game is actually the sticky player, which means whenever we're switching who is going to be which character for this run, we need to make sure that Noble 6 is the host of the game, so he's extra sticky, and that Noble 7 is not the host, so he can hold Noble 6 up without having him slide off every couple of steps. But then it got even weirder, because there's this weird stipulation that we found throughout this level that we really didn't quite understand why it was in this case. For some reason, we were just kind of vibing through this level with the sticky mechanic working, making some good progress, and all of a sudden Luke just died to an enemy, and when we tried to progress progress further after he respawned, for whatever reason, he wasn't sticky anymore. So we did even more tests along the way, and we kind of discovered over time that whatever mechanics go into having the player be able to be so balanced on Noble 7's head goes away the second that player dies, which did kind of prove to be this advantage where now we know how to progress through the levels in a much easier way, but also kind of carried this extra weight where if we died, we definitely would be faced with a harder challenge moving forward in the level. So kind of upped the stakes. It was definitely a huge discovery for the run, but we also now had to be extra careful that we didn't let Noble 6 ever die. But honestly, the sticky thing that we found out was such a game changer. It was so much better than before. I was able to crouch and walk at full speed and eventually got fully brave enough to just straight up sprint and not have to worry about Luke falling off my head. It was really weird and it's kind of hilarious at times. We have to be careful not to bump into random things because it messes it up, but we actually were able to just fly through Nightfall. We did the forklift glitch, of course, to clip ahead and ran past all of it, and we completed this level easily. But going into Tip of the Spear, things are a little bit different because this level has a lot of enemies, there's a lot of heavy-duty vehicles, and just one death can completely obliterate what we had discovered so far. The opening area of this level is a little bit chaotic, but fortunately we got a warthog shortly after, and we just kind of drove ahead to take out the tower by shooting at it instead of going inside. We kind of pushed ahead a little bit further in the level, and the factory section was a little tricky. We probably could have just drove a vehicle past the barrier, but since we kind of had the sticky thing working here, we decided just to stand on Luke's head. We did run into a very annoying problem when we got here, which are the concussion elites being super annoying. They're just constantly messing up our piggyback ride, our flow that we had working, our synergy. It was all gone every time we got hit in the face with a stupid concussion rifle. Okay, we're a little unsure whether or not the Revenant counted as a sit-down vehicle in the same way that the Warthog passenger seat would. I mean, technically I could have just stood on top of the Revenant, but I mean, upon close inspection, our lawyer said technically the Spartan's just hanging out of the side passenger seat, so it doesn't count. So we just used it anyways, and we drove further in the level, though it really wouldn't have made a difference either way had we not done this. We drove in the tower, and I just kind of shot the reactor from the Revenant and took that tower down easily and cleared the LZ for the Falcon part. And after we yeet our way into the Spire section, we ended up using jetpacks, which are so much fun when you can't walk otherwise. It just feels like you have all of this mobility and your possibilities are endless, being able to just kind of fly around and explore and just kind of do whatever you want. So this level actually wasn't as bad as maybe we thought it would be, but then we got to Long Night of Solace. This level actually also didn't provide too much of a problem, just a little bit long to say the least. The beach section was actually pretty easy to get through as we were manipulating the host stuff really well. We had already kind of gotten into a good flow of communicating and making sure we were constantly moving forward at times, so it was pretty easy except for when George bumped us. The flying part is just a stereotypical flying section, and then the indoor section was a little bit slow and annoying, and we kind of had to hold out for a while, but we got through this part no problem either. Going on to Exodus, we did have one section that was pretty terrifying along the way, which is when you're in the early section of the level and there's suicide grunts in this very close quarters area, and since I was the one who was Noble 6, I was in charge of shooting all of them while Luke just had to make sure I didn't fall off. But there's something definitely terrifying when a bunch of suicide grunts are running at you and you literally cannot walk out of the way to save yourself. So the stakes are really high here. Fortunately, we did get through this unscathed for the most part. When we got to the section with some brutes, Luke was walking by one of the brutes and I thought I could do something cool and assassinate a brute, and apparently I punched the brute and I got killed for killing a civilian that had managed to fuse inside of the body of the brute. GG. Well, two things happened here. I got more ammo when I respawned, and then we realized I wasn't sticky anymore because that counted as a death. So every time Luke tried to move me forward, I kept sliding off every 2 seconds, which means moving forward through this level, we absolutely had to do it the most tedious and annoying way. We continued on to push through despite all of the terrible stuff that had happened to us, but then we remembered when you get to the upper section after the elevator ride, there's some ODSTs with jetpacks. It literally made more sense for Luke to leave me behind in the elevator, walk all the way outside to the jetpacks, grab a jetpack, and then juggle a jetpack and sprint, constantly switching between the two, all the way back to me in the elevator, than it would have been for him to try to carry me with this greased up mechanic all the way outside downside to the jetpack myself. Though once I had the jetpack, it was definitely a lot easier to maneuver through the rest of this level, which was pretty nice. But we definitely knew we had to be more careful moving forward, that we didn't do something random like this, or just random civilians shouldn't spend their time hanging out inside of brutes, whatever. New Alexandria was actually a pretty easy walk in the park here. I just kind of threw Luke in the passenger seat of the Falcon, and I kind of just flew objective to objective and just hit the buttons real quick and just continued moving on. Honestly, there wasn't much Luke had to do, just chill. Going on to the package, we knew this level could potentially be difficult with the firefight section at the end, but actually the main section we had trouble with was when we got to the indoor section midway through the level. It wasn't that this section was any harder than when we did it in Sword Base, but the main issue that we ran into here is that there's so many enemies in every corner, and there's a ton of concussion rifles once again knocking us down, that we came very close to dying multiple times, and we had to be extra careful to make sure we were paying attention to our health, and we had to make sure that we were healing up along the way, and ammo felt kind of scarce on this level throughout the middle section. Now the beginning area with the tank was no problem, and the later section with the firefight actually turned out to be pretty easy because you have your whole squad there with you, so this part wasn't actually too bad, but the middle section was a pretty heavy challenge. And then lastly, we got to Pillar of Autumn, which was actually a level where we felt like it was a culmination of everything we had managed to learn throughout this challenge, and it was kind of exciting in a way that we went into this feeling completely destroyed by winter contingency, just to kind of find a random solution along the way that we had to break down individually, kind of led up into us knowing so much about Halo Reach's mechanics that we had been able to kind of become pros at doing this piggyback challenge on Reach. And this last level felt more like a testament of everything we had learned along the way, more so than an actual challenge. I mean, there was moments where I was just going full speed with Luke on my head. We took a vehicle, we even memed around a little bit using Emil to just kind of launch me, but it didn't really work too well. We don't know what Emil was doing. We actually just cruised through this level, and we felt pretty good about everything that we had managed to accomplish in doing this run. Every time we do a challenge like this, we learn something new about the Halo games that maybe we wouldn't have known before. While tons and tons of people have experienced Halo Reach's campaign, little nuances like one player being sticky for their first life while everyone else isn't sticky is something that probably isn't noticed as often unless you're doing some random challenge like this. So in that regard, it was pretty fun, and we cleared this level without any problems. And then we got to Lone Wolf. We kind of thought for a second how we were going to get through this level, then we remembered we just had to die. So that was actually pretty easy. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. If you don't know about Squarespace yet, they are the best website building and hosting service out there. They have a ton of features provided in one really easy to use online tool. They offer you one of the best analytics tools that are out there, and we know how important that is when trying to grow an audience and trying to figure out who is interacting with your content and which content your audience likes the most. So we really like the fact that there's this tool set available through Squarespace that you can use to easily see where traffic comes to and what type of trends over time, and just kind of gain any insight you need into the numbers you have on your own website. On top of that, you can make your website look clean and interactive with their easy to use customization tool that have a ton of base layouts that you can move around and design your website however you want to, and their categories offer anything from podcasts to online shops all the way to blogs and other things. Also, you can schedule posts for your website if you are running a blog, for example, and then once you have your website designed the way you want it to look, you can purchase your own domain name and make your website stand out even more. You can either integrate your already owned domain into Squarespace or just purchase one directly through them, and they make it really easy for you to use. Anyways, head over to squarespace.com/rocketsloth to save 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain code using code ROCKETSLOTH. But hey, after all of that, if you like this video, be sure to subscribe with notifications on for more videos just like this one, and you won't miss anything we upload, even if YouTube's acting all whack. Also, if you want to, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow me at Rocket Elijah, or you can follow Luke at Rocket Sloth Luke. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you all next time with a brand new video. Bye guys.